My name is Mattman, and this is going to be the second in a two-part, maybe three-part series about Columbus, navigation, and European colonialism of the Americas, and to some extent Africa, but that deserves its own video. Now today, we'll be talking about some stuff. So you realize, we have a new map now. This map is way better than the old one in the last one. It's not too lazy, it's still kind of lazy, but it is way better and it's a big upgrade from the last video's map. I'm sorry about the last video's map. But today's video is going to be the history of colonialism in the Americas, part 2. Boom! So, we left off last time with the United States of America, but we mainly left off because I was running out of time. But today, we're going to look at how Spain's colonial empire went from this tiny island to all of this. And it's kind of a wild story. And so, let's just jump into it. So this island right here, this tiny island, is an island in the Bahamian archipelago. And it was where Columbus landed in his famous voyage in 1492. 1492 was an important year. A lot of important stuff was going on, including the Columbus voyage. There was the Ottomans blocking the spice trade. So all of this events that would eventually lead to Columbus making his sail is actually centers around one event that happened earlier around that same time. And that was the event that blocked Europe from the spice trade aid, so what you gotta understand, and I talked a little bit about this in the last video, is that Europe's prime goal at the time was to get to India. And everything revolved around getting to India. It was every sailor's dream to get to India. And getting to India was like what healthcare is like today. Actually, that's a bad comparison. How does getting to India have anything to do with healthcare? But getting to India was a very big priority, and India is over here. I'm also going to draw parts of Russia right here because it's going to become important in the story of how Europeans got to the Americas a bit later on. And I'm also going to draw like Japan, and here's Korea. Okay, so there's parts of Asia over here. Looks a little sloppy, and I can fix that. There's not right now. I'll also draw New Zealand and Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea. There, that's enough. So this is our new map, which essentially covers almost the entire world, except for like that part over there. And also I forgot. Let me just draw the entire world map. This might take a little bit long, but it will be done in the end, I promise. So there's gonna be a little pause in the video, but luckily guys, there is going to be someone to entertain you while I'm gone. And that is, of course, Stickman. Hi, say hello to Stickman. And I want you to say hello to Stickman. And Stickman is a regular man. I said this in one of the last videos. But hello says Stickman. He looks a little different. He's going to look different each time. Notice I have a new hairstyle. This is also going to be a new regular. I'm going to have a different hairstyle in every episode. So, I'm gonna go, well, I'm gonna be on the screen, but you just won't see me talk. So, bye! Done, and that actually didn't take that long, but from now on, since the video is already 5 minutes long, we're just gonna jump into it. Quick camera, go. Okay, Columbus landed on this island in the Bahamian archipelago, and he was quickly able to subjugate and subdue the rest of the islands in the Caribbean Sea, and he conquered all of these islands, and he split them up into different colonies. So this was now Spanish territory. And if you were wondering, Spain is located right here. So Spain, he took off from here and landed here. And I know the grid is off. I'll fix it maybe in the future. So Spain conquers all the Caribbean. What's next? The next thing that happens is an explorer. A very famous explorer named Hernan Cortez became very, very important in the story. By this time, Columbus had already died, whatever. So there is a civilization in central Mexico, which was known as the Aztec Empire. And the Maya Empire, their close neighbors, were right next to them. Now, these two states didn't exactly get along. They had multiple wars, they had fighting, and the Aztecs had actually come into the picture later than you'd expect. They were related to people in the American West and the Great Basin called Uto-Aztecans. Cool name. And these Uto-Aztecans had nothing to do with their Aztec cousins. They were just related to one another. They don't appear in this story that much, so forget them. Anyways, Hernan Cortez dreamed about conquering the Americas for Spain and forming a new, imperial holding for Spain. And he became one of the very first conquistadors. Conquistadors were essentially people that were paid by the governments in the Caribbean to go out and form and conquer some Native Americans who lived in the Americas. That was South America, Central America, Mesoamerica, North America, extremely North America. They were just people that were supposed to conquer, and they were kind of like mercenaries or Cossacks, which would later happen in Russia, but they were kind of more like conquerors, essentially. Conquerors, that's what they were, conquerors. So, when Hernan Cortez landed in the Aztec Empire, one of his main reasons he landed there, in particular, instead of somewhere else, is the Aztecs had something very, very plentiful: gold. Gold was the top resource that the Aztec Empire had, and everyone wanted this gold. It was prized to be a very bountiful resource that was in the Aztec heartland. And to get it, it was very hard because no one dare touch the Aztecs. However, the main thing that I talked about in the last video one of the main things I talked about in the last video was that even though Europeans did kill a lot of natives, most of the Native Americans that got killed were actually killed by nasty diseases like smallpox. And these diseases infiltrated native culture in the Americas to the point where disease spread all around the two continents. And which is this really bad disease, smallpox, cholera, all of these other diseases. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And the diseases infiltrated native populations so much that they made it essentially impossible for Native Americans to coexist with Europeans until recent exposures. And I say recent, I mean recent, because until just a couple of years ago, Native Americans were very, very susceptible to diseases, and they somewhat still are, but just a lot less than they were at the time of Hernán Cortés's arrival. Anyways, using betrayal and a network of alliances, Cortés was slowly able to conquer the Aztec Empire and expand his influence in the region. Eventually, he completely subdued the Aztec and formed a colony in the former lands of the Aztec Empire, known as New Spain. This was the foundations that would eventually build what is now known as Mexico, a nation that is very celebrated and prized to this day. Now, the Maya, on the other hand, were very much harder to subdue because they had the forests as their colloquial. They had the forest as an escape. The forest was basically the thing that made the Maya and some of the other tribes so tough to conquer. The forest gave the Maya protection, and the forest also gave the Maya life. The forest and the stars and all of that stuff were actually, they played a very important role in Maya culture. Now, since you can't really see the Maya from here, I'm actually going to zoom in to a smaller pic of what the region looked like. This is what the Maya states look like. Maya culture orbited around these lands right here. This was the Maya territory. Those lands have always been Maya territory, and sometimes the Maya even conquered land that was outside of their usual range, and even conquered lands in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. I think I'm saying that right, Tehuantepec? But in the classical Maya period, which was sometime between 200 AD and 700 AD, the Maya were able to conquer all and expand into all of this land and became the dominant civilization in Mesoamerica at the time. This was the classical Mayan age. This is where a lot of the stuff where you hear about like the stars and the Maya and all those beliefs, this is the age where that comes from. The most important thing in this age, however, was a war between two of the Maya city-states, which was known as the war between Tikal and Calakmul. Calakmul and Tikal were powerful city-states in the heart of the Maya area. And these two city-states had bad blood between them. Because of that, they constantly fighted to the death in a war that consumed classic Maya culture and lasted about 500 or 300 years, depending on what people said. It was one of the longest wars in human history and lasted so long that it might have actually been sort of the collapse of Maya station. Now, actually, this guy, Mr. Stickman, can go home because he's acting really annoying to my expansion of the map. Because we have to expand the map again to illustrate another colorful point of Maya culture. And that other colorful point was actually not even a part of Maya culture, but was actually actually a part of this region's culture, the Central Mexican area. At the time, in Central Mexico, lived a powerful civilization that was feared among many of the region's smaller civilizations. And that civilization was Teotihuacan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not. But this civilization, Teotihuacan, I'm just going to call it Teotihuacan, was so powerful at the time that it was able to conquer essentially all of central Mexico, and it became one of the most powerful civilizations in Mesoamerica to date, even comparable to the Aztecs. And these people built huge buildings that were very classically structured and were very advanced. They were actually, at the time, the most advanced civilization in the entirety of the two American continents. And because of that advantage, Teotihuacan was able to project its power over the region immensely. And it even debatably started the war between Tikal and Calakmul by appointing a prince, I believe, from Teotihuacan to the throne of Tikal. This sparked very immense conflict between one of the region's other powers, Calakmul. Calakmul was not very advanced at the time. However, using other methods and the conquest of one of Tikal's allies, Calakmul was able to project its power over the region. The wars went back and forth between Calakmul having superiority and Tikal having superiority. In the end, most of the time, Tikal and Calakmul were equals to each other, but generally Calakmul had the upper hand. However, what's even weirder about this time is no one actually knows how it ends. Around the year 700, many civilizations in Mesoamerica, including Teotihuacan and the Maya, for no reason that has been discovered yet, went under enormous decline. Teotihuacan bit the dust in the 600s and was completely destroyed. The weird thing is that no one knows how this collapse happened. And some people have been suggesting ideas like rampant disease or the social structure in Tikal and Calakmul and the rest of Mesoamerica collapsing to the point of the civilization's doom and end. However, this is kind of just a theory instead of a theory with proven evidence. We're going to stop talking about the Maya because it's taking up a lot of time. And we need to focus back to the colonies. So after years of pressure, New Spain was able to conquer the Maya and most of the rest of South America under Hernan Cortez himself. And New Spain became Spain's golden colony. However, other conquistadors wanted to be just as great as Hernan Cortez, including one Francisco Pizarro, which leads us to the next chapter of the brutal, morbid, and sometimes dark story of the conquest of the Americas. The conquest of an empire so rich, so prized, and so uncompatible with the rest of American culture that it became a well-known thing of this empire's existence even in the modern day. This empire was, of course, the Inca Empire. The Inca Empire was similar to the Aztec Empire, as unlike the Maya, the Inca had been in the region for only around 100 to 200 years. Its started with the city-state of Cuzco, which is in modern-day Peru. Cuzco was located, like I said before, in modern-day Peru. Now, if you go to the Natural History Museum, you can learn a lot about all of this Mesoamerican culture and how cool it was. But you can also learn a lot by talking to me, because I've been to the Natural History Museum before, and I know a lot about the Natural History Museum and the stuff that's there. So, today, I hope that when you leave this video, you're going to have learned something from me. So that's what I hope, and that's my goal. So, let's just jump into it. The Inca Empire was an empire in Peru, which started with the city-state of Cuzco, which was around here. Now, in around 1350, the city-state of Cuzco went head-to-head with its rival, its biggest rival, the city-state of Lupaca. The city-state of Lupaca was completely demolished in the ongoing fight. And thus so, the king of Cuzco proclaimed himself the ruler of the region and formed the Inca Empire. An empire so great that it would dominate South America for years to come. The Inca Empire expanded out of the region of Inca and eventually conquered the kingdom of Chamorrci to the north. By doing this, the Inca Empire had conquered all of the Andes Mountains. And actually, the interesting thing is that the Inca Empire had an interesting way of governing, and that was Tawantinsuyu. I nailed it, I think. Tawantinsuyu essentially translates, I think, to Way of the Four Quarters, because it was essentially a way where you could divide the Inca Empire into four quarters. And there were four quarters of the Inca Empire. There was Antisupi, which was on the fringes of the empire, and was named after the Anti people, which is also where the Andes Mountains got their name. Then there was Cuyasuyu, which was in the southern parts of South America, the Inca Empire. And it was the least populated and least directly controlled region of the Inca Empire. Next was Kuntasuyu, which was on the coast and dealt with most of the empire's shipping. And lastly, in the north was an immense region called Chamorrci. And Chamorrci was a region in the north of the Inca Empire that essentially dwarfed all of the other Inca regions because it was the richest and most profitable out of all of the regions. And this was the region that ambitious explorer Francisco Pizarro, wanted to conquer and had interest in. So Francisco Pizarro set out south from the outposts at the border of New Spain, subduing Panama, and the majority of Colombia as well. He quickly, after taking a little break, expanded his new colony and expanded it far to the reach of the Inca Empire. This is also how modern-day Colombia got its start. After subduing the north of the Inca Empire, tragedy struck when the king of the empire got sick and died of smallpox. This is exactly what I meant when I said that Europeans killed and caused most of the deaths in the Americas by bringing new diseases that natives just simply had no immunity to, which is kind of unfair. So the Spanish, with the help of Francisco Pizarro, were able to conquer the Inca Empire. Due to the king's death, a civil war in the Empire broke out between two sides. One of the sons conquered the south, where not a lot of people lived and was more rural, while the other son inherited the capital, Cuzco, and tried to project his empire by conquering the south. However, the Spanish ended up breaking the conflict up by subduing both of the Inca Empires as breaks, dynasties, and projected itself further by conquering the Guarani people of the Pampas. By the late 1540s, Francisco Pizarro and what was left of his colony were able to make ongoing settlements on the coast. But it wouldn't be for a specific nation, a nation that actually was the same one that rejected Columbus's proposal in the first place, which really got things going. A nation that would start the start of South American culture and would really put South America on the map. A nation that is prized for its beauty, symbolism, and identity, even to this day. And if you don't know what I'm talking about yet, I am talking about Brazil. Brazil! And that is where we are going to leave this video off for today. I hope you enjoyed. This is Mattman signing off.